Hello, everyone, my Facebook community, Amazing Heart Driven Helpers. We are here today going live to talk about something called compassion fatigue. My name is Emma Liz. I'm a health coach that helps people who are stressed and on the verge of burnout go from worn out and exhausted to motivated and energized. And one of the biggest challenges for those who are in the helping professions is something called compassion fatigue. And today we have the privilege of having Dr. Omar Reda, who is a very experienced psychiatrist. He is going to be on here with us to talk about compassion fatigue, ways that you might be experiencing it, as well as ways to find healing through it. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Omar Reda. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Emma. Nice to meet you.
Yes, it's so good to have you. We first, really want to talk about, I know you have a book coming out called The Wounded Healer, The Pain and Joy of Caregiving. Can you tell us a little bit more about this book and kind of what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, thank you. So I have many personal encounters with the trauma story, but something that I was privileged to go through multiple experiences that either in a war zone or in a trauma context that has to do with immigration and leaving my home country. I found that rather than focusing on the pain and the graphic details of what happened to me, I find lots of resilience and coping and even a beauty in my trauma story. So I'm focusing more on the joy of being a caregiver. I had been a psychiatrist for over 10 years now. I have worked both in the United States and also in refugee camps in many parts of the world, and was very recently asked by one of the publishers to just talk about the trauma that caregivers go through on a daily basis. And we know it's not only the pandemic, there are things that happened before, during, and after the pandemic that caregivers are struggling with. So I'm hoping to just give them a voice and platform and safe space to try to talk about that specific issue.
Wow, that is truly incredible. The idea for the book, is that something that kind of you've been thinking about over time, or is it something that just hit you one day as, oh my goodness, I need to put all of this into a book?
Yeah, I mean, this is book number 5. I have the privilege of writing multiple books about the trauma story, both when it comes to the individual level and also when it comes to a family context. I wrote chapters in books about hate and how to respond to hate in a constructive way. So interfaith dialogue and stuff like that. I've been leading trauma-informed training and trauma-informed camping for children. So I've been involved in this, specific task for a number of years, basically since I left my home country in 1999, but mainly after what happened in the Middle East in 2011. There is lots of trauma that happened there because of multiple wars that started in 2011. Many of them are still going on even today. So just, finding that I can focus my energy on the psychosocial healing, because many of the wounds that happen because of wars and armed conflict are invisible wounds, but many people are focused on the physical aspects and what they can see. Many people, because of the stigma, they kind of ignore the emotional needs, and they can carry a very heavy price if we ignore them.
What you just said there about invisible wounds, is that statement is so powerful. And definitely talking about compassion fatigue, that's not always something that's really visible. It can be, like you said, an invisible wound. In your experience, how would you define compassion fatigue, Dr. Omar Reda?
Yeah, I mean, there are many definitions, and I think, the easiest one is people get exhausted because they care. So if you are a caregiver, there is a heavy price you can pay, not only physically. Yes, I mean, the physical fatigue is the one that's most visible, but there is also scars that can happen from listening to the trauma stories of other people. So you need to make sure that you are taking care of your emotional needs. So there are psychological wounds, also your social needs, because the caregiving can impact your family dynamics, your social support structure, and also your spiritual aspects. Make sure that you tend to your soul, because I recently read a book by Dr. Edward Smink. The title of the book is The Soul of Caregiving, and basically, really, the PTSD and the post-traumatic stress disorder that happens to us caregivers is more of a something that touches our soul, very, very deep wounds that can maybe even make us have questions about existential issues, about how the world is a safe space, how can we trust people when people are causing harm to other humans. So mainly it's a soul ache. If you wanna just a simple explanation of compassion fatigue, it's a soul ache that we feel when we care about other people.
Yeah. Thank you for describing it in that way. It things like compassion fatigue. It's really helpful to have a very simple, clear definition that anyone who might be experiencing compassion fatigue can really just identify with and be, oh, I think I maybe have experienced that, because you phrased it in that way of that soul ache, or that exhaustion from caring for other people, especially when you're in professions or work that is really tending to the very deep needs of individuals or communities. Have you yourself ever experienced compassion fatigue?
Yeah, I mean, multiple times, of course. And the more gentle and empathic you are, the more prone you are to compassion fatigue and eventually burnout. So if you don't really pay attention to compassion fatigue, you might get completely burnt out, and that can manifest in, either bodily symptoms like aches and pains. It can manifest in a relational context. Maybe you'll have a short temper with your loved ones. Maybe there's even domestic violence, or you might, eventually have your marriage break down if you don't look at the trauma story of what you are going through as the enemy. Sometimes, especially with the stigma that we have as caregivers, we don't talk about our emotions, and we give all of our energy to our patients and our clients. So our loved ones will have only the leftover of our time and our energy, and eventually we have nothing left in us to give to ourselves. And I think it will be wonderful if we, just make sure that self-care is not a luxury, it's a responsibility. So in
Wow.
order to take care of other people, you have to also take care of yourself.
Wow. Yeah, you were saying some just powerful statements today. Self-care is not a luxury. It was a responsibility. I really want to hold on to that for a moment. And any of you who are listening, I've seen a few people come in, or any of you who are watching the replay of this, really, really think about that self-care is not a luxury. It is a responsibility that you have to yourself, that we have to ourselves, to our communities, to our loved ones, to our family, to those we're serving. It oftentimes can have a kind of selfish connotation around it, this idea of like self-care, especially for those of you who are in the work of caregiving, of service-oriented work for individuals or communities in the helping professions. You are in that work because you're designed in a certain way. You are wired to really tend to the needs of others, and you are so gifted in that. But where many of us in that fall short is thinking that caring for ourselves is selfish, and selfish doesn't have the best connotation. It's more of like a negative, it's a bad thing to be selfish, but self-care is not selfish. Just like Dr. Omar Reda said, it is a responsibility. So thank you for sharing that piece. When it comes to your own experience of compassion fatigue, or maybe just like what you've observed in your work, in your life, are there any ways you would say that we can find healing through compassion fatigue?
Yeah, I mean, it's very important. The first step to solve any problem is to talk about it. So make sure that you acknowledge that you are going through some struggles, and that's not a sign of weakness. Don't place a judgment to your experience. There are many people who are standing on your shoulders, so make sure that you have a very sound foundation. If your foundation is shaky, then the whole structure will crumble. So right now we feel guilty, and we want to protect our clients and our communities, and we behave like superhumans, and we are the glue that holds our families and communities together. But even like machines, they deserve breaks. Make sure that you take breaks to re-energize and recenter and refresh. And there are like 5 R's I like to share when it comes to self-care. The first one, that recognize that you need a break, and then request a break, and then actually relax during your break, because many of us caregivers, we subject ourselves to more trauma even when we are on our breaks. And then just recenter, refresh, and make sure that you realize your priorities, and you can re-engage with your clients in a more productive way. But if there is a burnout, if there is compassion fatigue, you might actually dread what you are doing. You see your clients and even your loved ones as a burden, and caregiving is supposed to give you joy also. If you are only dealing with the burden and you see your job as only a job, it's not a calling anymore, then maybe you are going through some compassion fatigue. So the first step is to acknowledge that maybe you are going through some difficult time, and then talk about it. Find somebody that you can consult with. It does not have to be a professional. It can be your co-workers, and it will be wonderful if you are working in a culture and that can promote and encourage people expressing their emotions. Unfortunately, caregiving is a culture of secrecy, toxic stress, and silent suffering. There are many people and many heartbreaking stories behind closed doors, and sometimes we even lose our co-workers for substance use or suicide, and some families, they break down. And all of this can be preventable if we just normalize caregiving and humanize caregivers.
Yes. Yes. Yes to everything you're saying. I would like to go back a little bit to one of the 5 R's that you mentioned, which is, and I'm writing these down, I love it. You mentioned the relax one, but sometimes in that, when we're relaxing, when we take a break, which is great, we can I think you said, expose ourselves to more trauma or more stress in taking those breaks. Do you have any examples of what that could look like, of how somebody could be stressing themselves out or exposing themselves to more trauma on their break when in that relax
Yeah,
part?
I mean, it happens frequently, especially when there is either a disaster or even a protracted you know um, episode like what we have now with the pandemic. So some people, they might go and watch more news about how many new cases are in the state or in my hospital. Some people might be watching the two towers that collapsed in September 11. Some people might be watching what's going on with the refugee camps and children in armed conflict zones and so on. Because we don't have much time as caregivers, sometimes we want to catch up on our social life during our breaks. And we know social media is really anything but social. It causes lots of separation and anxiety, and brings sometimes more trauma to somebody who's already traumatized. So most of us are wounded healers. Some of us are walking wounded. Some of us are even bleeding profusely, and we just are very stubborn. We don't want to admit that we need breaks, and sometimes we receive feedback and we become defensive. And I think the culture has its own stigma, not only because we see compassion fatigue as a sign of weakness, or even some people label it as a mental illness, but we just are afraid of the repercussions. If my supervisor or my coworkers know that I have vulnerability, maybe I can be seen as a fragile. Maybe they call me a crybaby. Maybe they will report me to human resources, and all of this is very unfortunate, because this is a normal response to abnormal situation. like the pandemic, the trauma is abnormal. Our human response is normal because we are only humans.
Yes. I'm thinking about for someone who is in a work culture where they are experiencing compassion fatigue, or maybe that's part of the culture at work where everyone's experiencing compassion fatigue. There's two things that come to mind that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. So the first one is I've noticed in my own work, not only am I a coach, and many of my those in my Facebook community know this, I also have worked in the nonprofit sector for several years. I'm a case manager, working with vulnerable individuals and communities. And oftentimes, what can happen in these workspaces and cultures, part of the culture is almost a glorification of sort of sacrificing yourself, or the worker that is always sacrificing themselves and really is probably on that verge of burnout is just put on this pedestal of, oh, everyone needs to be like this person, they do such an amazing job. Love to hear your thoughts on that and how to navigate that in a work context. And then the second piece is, what would be your advice for somebody who doesn't feel comfortable at work talking about what they're actually experiencing, because maybe they don't feel safe to do so with their boss or their coworkers or even HR?
Yeah, I mean, so many of us, we have that martyr mentality that, I am the center of the universe, and if I take one break, then everything will fall apart. And maybe we are overprotective of our clients. And really, with our heavy caseloads and with the amount of paperwork that we do, this is an unrealistic expectation that we place on our own shoulders. So make sure that, don't put yourself at the back of the line, because you are the most important part of the care team. If your community loses you, if your clients lose you, they lose on lots of talent. And really what you are trying to avoid by not taking breaks now is becoming a reality, which is you are completely burnt out, and you're gonna maybe even dread the job and see your clients as a burden, and eventually you might even quit. But with the second part, which is very unfortunate, and I hope many cultures start to look at this seriously, is to really look at the employee, the caregiver, as the center of the treatment care plan, and just humanize their experience. And I think most cultures are not because of bad intention. It's not because they are toxic cultures to start with. Everybody is already emotionally taxed. Even your supervisor, most likely they have their own responsibilities, and maybe they go through their own compassion fatigue. So everybody needs somebody to talk to, and it's only fair and human to expect to lean on each other at times, because we are in this together, and this is a very protracted illness, either the pandemic or the human violence that we see, and the setbacks that we have noticed in our country recently. Many people are stretched thin, and if you really don't take care of yourself, you might end up going home and taking all of that anxious and restless energy on your loved ones. And imagine you are working long hours and trying to provide materialistically for your family, and then you take your anger and frustration on them. You only are providing their materialistic needs, and you are forgetting about their emotional needs. And I call that losing the American dream, chasing the American dream, because I think the American dream is our families, and if we lose our family, then what's the point?
Wow. Yes, absolutely. You touched on so many important pieces in that, just that really getting to the core of just humanizing. I was kind of noticing that as a theme, of something we all really need to remember, is just as we want to humanize our clients or those that we're working with, it's also really important to humanize ourselves, because when we start falling into that kind of martyr mentality, then we're stepping out of humanizing ourselves, because we are thinking that we can do more than what we're really have the capacity to do, and also more that than we are really meant to do. And oftentimes, I think something that came to mind is for anyone who is in a work culture where you're feeling stressed out, burnt out, like you're experiencing compassion fatigue, know that if you're feeling that way, odds are many of your colleagues, your coworkers are, your supervisor might be, and if you don't feel comfortable talking to them about it, that just want to affirm that and know that that's okay to feel that way, but also know that your coworkers might also be experiencing the same thing, that they don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about it. And if you were to bring it up and just be vulnerable, even though that is definitely has its challenges to do, there might be some shifts that happen through those conversations. And just like Dr. Omar Reda said, the first step is just acknowledging what's going on, acknowledging how you're feeling, the compassion fatigue, and talking about it.
And just Emma, one point is self-care is not a replacement for a toxic environment. So if you work in a toxic environment and you really, really try to change the situation and you are only facing negativity, then maybe sometimes, leaving is better than half staying. Sometimes you might just need to leave a toxic environment and work for someone that values you, because you are the most valuable member of the team.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that is very, very true. Sometimes, it's okay. It's needed to leave a situation as well when it's just no longer healthy. When it comes to compassion fatigue, we know it can be experienced by individuals, but there's also many cases where it's experienced by communities. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, what your thoughts are on the individual experience of compassion fatigue, but also the communal experience of it?
Yeah, and when it comes to individual, I think we talked about the impact of the trauma and bearing witness to traumatic stories. It has its impact on our body, has its impact on our mind, on our heart, and our soul. So we need to make sure that all of these four aspects are tended to, and we treat ourselves with self-compassion. This is very important. But also, sometimes compassion fatigue can look like PTSD. And sometimes you have intrusive memories, you have flashbacks, you have even nightmares of your work and your clients, and sometimes you cannot let go of what happened during your work. And make sure that if that's happening, that you take care of your needs, and if you cannot do it alone, lean on your social support structure. And something about the American culture, many times we suffer in silence because we think that we can do it on our own. And some of us, we don't want to burden other people. And both extremes are unhelpful and unhealthy as enemies. And this is what we have noticed recently in our country.
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely a super interesting lens to look at what's happening in the country, what has been happening and has been happening, for many years, centuries even, under the surface, and things rising up. Looking at it from a lens of compassion fatigue and that silent suffering, and like you spoke about American culture and how there is that almost that value to, or it's held as a value, almost an ethic even, to the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do it on your own, that type of thing. How problematic, it really can be in so many ways. When you were talking, I was thinking about how in that aspect of self-care and self-compassion, sometimes there can be a sense of guilt that comes with doing that, depending on the context that you are working in or serving in, because if, and I'm speaking from experience on some of these things, it's just it's a large part of the reason why I do the work in my coaching that I do now is from that personal experience. But when working in contexts where folks or communities are suffering on such intense levels, and then you look at your own life and we compare, just being honest there, compare that comparison of my life isn't as bad. and then feeling bad if you care for yourself, while knowing that those you're serving are going through that trauma that they're going through. I really want to bring that up because I know not only have I experienced that in the past, but I know many colleagues, those I've worked with, experienced that, but it's just not something that's talked about. So what are your thoughts on that? And yeah, any comments?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, there is lots of bullying and even gaslighting in our industry. The healthcare industry can be quite toxic when it comes to people expressing their emotions. We might get, a system that will tell us we cannot see your wounds. So obviously, your wounds only exist in your head. So to dismiss somebody's, trauma story or their struggle means they will go into silence and they will keep the secret and they will continue that cycle of dysfunction. But sometimes this is self-imposed when we think that if I show any sign of vulnerability, and I think vulnerability is a sign of courage, it's not sign of weakness. But anyway, sometimes when we show any emotions, we start to blame ourselves. There is lots of guilt and shame associated with us expressing any emotions, because I am like, oh my God, I am a caregiver. How dare I'm not taking care of myself? Or how come what I'm preaching, I'm not practicing? Or we think that, we don't have any human needs. Our needs are superhuman. And if I just show any sign of struggle or fatigue, that means I am my own identity, my own self-worth. I place my value on what I give to others. And this is very unfortunate because, remember, I mean, as a caregiver, if you just place your core value and your self-worth and your identity on what you do rather than who you are, then many times you will struggle with performance, especially if you fall short of a medical error because you are not sleeping, and because sleep deprivation is very important indicator of compassion fatigue and burnout. So you never hear like a brain surgeon will say, oh my God, why am I experiencing a headache? You never have somebody who is a surgeon, for example, now they have a gallbladder stone. They will say, no, I cannot operate because I am a surgeon. I am not supposed to have any surgical procedure happen to me. It's just very unfortunate how we discriminate against our mind. When it comes to our body, if somebody is bleeding, we will rush them to the emergency room. But many of us are bleeding emotionally, and we are just dismissing that and saying, no, this does not exist.
Right. It really speaks to that stigma on mental health and all of those things, huh? Yeah. Yeah, and that could be, we could talk for hours on that, right?
I know. But I mean, I think education is very important, and especially if you are not fighting alone, if people in your team believe in the same cause, if your organization is also supportive of this cause, and even if people are not, you have time when you go home. Hopefully, your loved ones can be a source of grounding for you. For example, what grounds me is my faith, my family, and also gratitude and acts of service. I love to go to refugee camps. I love to, be grateful to what I have. But also, there are things that you can do. And self-care is not only, taking care of your body needs. Make sure that you take care of the needs of your soul, your heart, and your mind. So you can do activities that are nature-based, like going in the outdoors. You can do activities that are, arts-based, like drawing and journaling and painting and so on.
Yes.
You can do movement-based activities like exercise. You can do memory-based activities like rituals and reflections, meditation, mindfulness. All of these are really wonderful.
Absolutely, yeah. There's so many options we really have to caring for ourselves, and though how our self-care might look different because of COVID and because of just acknowledging that our sources of comfort and community aren't oftentimes not looking the same as they are now. There still are so many ways that we can practice that that care and building that, like you spoke to, that community of care, that we really are wired, like you said, for connections and community. As we start to come to a close in our conversations, what would you say, Dr. Omar Reda, is, just to kind of sum it up for anyone who is really trying to know, or maybe isn't sure if they're what they are experiencing is compassion fatigue? What would you say it feels like or looks like?
Yeah, I mean, don't dismiss it. If something, either walks or talks or looks like compassion fatigue, it might be compassion fatigue. And if you ignore it, if you just say, I cannot see the big invisible elephant in the room, even though it's very, very clear and obvious, but sometimes we are not comfortable, acknowledging that we have needs, because we are not supposed to have needs. We are supposed to dismiss our own, human basic needs. We are supposed to just brush off our trauma and wipe our tears and stand up and keep going. This is the mentality that we have learned as caregivers, and this is a toxic and dysfunctional cycle that we need to break. But one thing, Emma, like when it comes to gratitude, that I really recently read a book called Deep Kindness by Houston Kraft, and he mentioned like an episode that led him to write more about this topic. He said he was on the airplane flying to another city, and the person next to him started to talk, and he was very tired. He wants to sleep, and she just was quite friendly and was quite talkative. So eventually she asked him what was he doing, and he said he write about kindness. And she started to cry. She said, she lost her father like before she boarded a plane, and she basically was crying in the airport for about 3 hours, and there are like these 3,000 people passing by her, and not a single person said, "Ma'am, are you okay? Why are you crying? Can I provide something for you?" He said like our kindness right now is kind of superficial. We don't check on each other. Sometimes even our teammates and our co-workers, we say, "How's your day?" And I don't even listen to the answer because we are too busy. All of us are very busy, and it only takes a small second to change somebody's life or even save their life. And we know that there are encounters when just a simple act of smile or eye contact have actually saved somebody from jumping off the bridge or hanging themselves. And we don't want to lose anybody to this. And compassion fatigue is one of the reasons people get burned out and eventually might end up losing their life. So make sure that you don't dismiss any fatigue that you feel, either in your body, in your mind, in your heart, or in your soul. Make sure that you reach out to your loved ones, to your social support network, and there is no shame in reaching out for professionals.
Thank you so much, Dr. Omar Reda. Truly, you have so much expertise on this, I think, and so much, just so much value that you've brought today to the community. Really, everyone, just like Dr. Omar Reda said, if you think that you could be experiencing compassion fatigue, know that first that, I mean, this is unfortunate, but it is so common and oftentimes normal in the work that you are doing, caring for others. So just like he said, if it walks or talks or looks like compassion fatigue, don't dismiss it. Talk to somebody about it today. I want you to know that I will be starting a group coaching program in 2021 that is going to be focusing in on topics like compassion fatigue for those who are in the helping professions, to really help bring solutions and help you to care for yourself in a sustainable way so that you can continue doing the amazing work that you are doing caring for others. Thank you so much, Dr. Omar Reda, for being here with us today. Is there anything else that you want to share or leave us with before we end?
It has been my pleasure, Emma. Thank you for hosting me. And just, I again want to remind people that caregiving is supposed to bring you lots of joy. So if it's only a burden, if it's only causing you pain, maybe you are experiencing compassion fatigue. So now it's the time to tend to your soul. Take care of yourself.
Yes, and don't forget that he will be coming out with a book, The Wounded Healer, The Pain and Joy of Caregiving, so keep a lookout for that. And if you are interested in that group coaching opportunity, definitely DM me and I'll share more info with you on that. Hope you have a wonderful day, Dr. Omar Reda, and would love to stay connected with you. And everyone, hope you have a wonderful day too. Care for yourselves, be compassionate and gentle to yourself, and I will see you all soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.